Welcome to Ormskirk, a wonderful market town situated in the West Lancashire countryside between the cities of Preston and Liverpool. Best known as one of Britain's premier producers of gingerbread, Ormskirk's compact town centre is full of history, with a number of captivating landmarks packed onto its main streets. Over the course of this walk, we'll wind our way between the main streets and alleyways that make up central Ormskirk, as we navigate the town's riveting history. But we begin at the heart of town, looking up at the clock tower. The symbol of the town today, the clock tower was erected in 1876 on the site of the town's old market cross, which historically marked the site where markets were held in Ormskirk. Markets, still held in the town today, have a long history in Ormskirk dating all the way back to the year 1286, and the clock tower typically forms the centre point of all markets in the modern day, with stalls emanating out from it along the town's four main streets. But as well as serving as a useful device to tell the time, the clock tower was also once somebody's home, though it wasn't exactly meant to be. There's a famous old story of Ormskirk from around the turn of the 20th century of a man named Old Bowler, who used to walk around town followed by a goose. Well known to the people of Ormskirk, Old Bowler and his goose friend would typically sleep wherever they could, and for a while they made the inside of the clock tower their home, though it appears the police eventually cleared Old Bowler out, and sadly took his goose away too. Now from the clock tower towards the western side of town, we're looking along Church Street, which as the name suggests, leads towards the town's parish church. We'll visit the church later on in our walk, but the brownish coloured building on our right was once Ormskirk's town hall, built in 1779 to replace an earlier town hall on the same site. Like today, the old town hall stood above a shop, at the time thought to be a butcher's, squeezing in a number of courtrooms and council meeting chambers on the upper floors into the already packed town centre. Just at the foot of Church Street, meanwhile, we find one of a number of the town's delightful gingerbread men statues. As we mentioned, Ormskirk is historically renowned for its gingerbread production, which began in the town nearly 300 years ago in the mid-18th century. Later on, we'll talk more about the intriguing history of how gingerbread production began in Ormskirk, and how it rose to become a favourite of none other than the king himself. But we'll now make our way down Burscough Street. Now Burscough Street is one of the oldest streets in town, but up on the side of one of its houses, we can also see a brand new mural depicting the renowned local clockmaker, Thomas Barry. As well as manufacturing a range of plush grandfather clocks, in the mid-18th century, Barry famously created a groundbreaking astronomical clock that tracked the path of the moon and was able to forecast when Easter Sunday would fall each year. Many of the clocks made here in Ormskirk by Thomas Barry were later auctioned off to much fanfare, and the old astronomical clock found its way into an exhibition at the Walker Museum in Liverpool, where you can still see it today. Now as we continue down Burscough Street, this narrow road lined with shops was once upon a time the main route where travellers would pass through Ormskirk. Running in a slanted north-south direction, this was once the most direct route between Preston and Liverpool, and as a result of the busy passing trade, many locals set up businesses along this street. Also peppered with small alleyways that jut off the main road, Burscough Street as we know it today looks much the same as it did in the late 19th century. The only big change is that the street has been nicely pedestrianised, with travellers between Preston and Liverpool now typically bypassing Ormskirk's town centre by the A59. But the town's historic position on the main route between the two major cities gave birth to a number of coaching inns, where travellers would stop for a meal and a rest, and one of them is still in operation today. This is the Bucket Vine Inn, a fairly substantial tavern that was built back in the late 17th century. Complete with a courtyard at the back and once even having been home to a theatre, which has sadly now been demolished, the Buck was always a highly attractive venue for people to stop off in on their way through Ormskirk. The pub, beautifully restored in recent years to look much like it did centuries ago, likely takes its name from the story of the Stag and the Vine, one of Aesop's fables. The fable tells the story of a stag that hides from hunters behind a large vine, before the stag then proceeds to eat the vine's leaves, thereby causing a rustling noise that unfortunately alerts the hunters to its position. The moral of that story? Ingratitude sometimes brings its own punishment. Now just across from the Bucketh Vine, we find ourselves in a narrow alleyway by the name of Mystic Mews, a particularly atmospheric cobbled lane bordered by Victorian-era buildings, today used as houses and shops. As we mentioned, there are a number of alleyways that jut off the main drag of Burscough Street, some still home to an old-world feel like Mystic Mews, and some having been recently refurbished to form a rather distinctive feature of Ormskirk's town centre. Once upon a time, the many narrow lanes of Ormskirk snaked their way in between houses and workshops, likely having been some of the dingier parts of the town centre compared with its busy main streets. However, just across Burscough Street, there's one of the best examples of the town's beautifully redeveloped alleyways, the Church Walks shopping centre. As a compact old medieval market town, there's not much space to build big new retail parks in the heart of Ormskirk without doing away with its historic buildings, but the town has found a real sweet spot by utilising the old alleyways to increase the town centre's retail capacity. As a result, there still exist many centuries-old buildings in the heart of town, like this, the Stiles, an impressive old stone house that's at least 400 years old. Possibly the oldest building in town, the Stiles was built before the year 1609, though it's not known for sure why. Some say it was a theatre, while other explanations offered suggest that it was a chapel, which came to be used by Catholics when their religion was suppressed, and they had to worship in secret. Later on in history, the Stiles became the workshop of a basket makers, and nowadays it's a popular bar set back from Ormskirk's busy main streets. Now here, hidden from view on the town's main streets, we're walking through the delightful Church Walks shopping centre, which is home to a range of boutique shops and cafes. A small shopping centre of many different faces, Church Walks is a delightful hidden gem of the town centre that's easy to miss when you first visit Ormskirk. Developed and refurbished over the last century, this is perhaps the most beautiful part of this hidden shopping arcade, topped with a gorgeous glass roof that allows plenty of daylight into this narrow lane, still lined with old houses in which shops now operate. The arcade can also be a helpful place to hide out if you get caught in a rain shower here. But having walked through it from Burscough Street, it's now going to take us back onto one of the main roads in central Ormskirk, Church Street. As we saw at the start of our walk, Church Street leads from the clock tower up towards Ormskirk's fascinating parish church, which we'll make our way towards now. But as well as having once been the home of the old town hall, Church Street is another place where you can discover some of the hidden gems of Ormskirk's history. Now, much like Burscough Street, Church Street is lined with modern shops, and there are also a number of small alleyways, called yards, which jut off the main street. In the medieval era, these yards were the home of workshops, where craftsmen worked. But in the 19th century, as the Industrial Revolution caused Ormskirk's population to grow, they were turned into residential areas called courts. This was one such court, Court number 5, at the end of which there were once a collection of overcrowded rooms in which Ormskirk's poorest lived in tough conditions, living with little daylight and sharing a toilet among multiple families, factors which contributed to the spread of disease and a high death rate. The old dwellings of Ormskirk's courts are long since demolished, but across the street here, we're looking up at a large pub of roughly the same era. Originally known as the Snig's Foot Hotel, at the rear of the pub there also existed one of the many breweries to be found in the town centre, which provided ale to the pub in front of it. While there is still a pub in the building, the brewery at its rear ceased operations back in the 1950s, as many local breweries across Britain began to lose out to larger scale manufacturers. Now, we've made it to the top of Church Street, where it comes as no surprise that we find the grand parish church of Ormskirk. Known as the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, It's one of the most important buildings in Ormskirk's history, standing on a site that has likely been used for worship for over 1,000 years. As for the church that stands today, it is the oldest building in town, but it's not certain when exactly it was built. The oldest parts of the church date as far back as the 12th century, but it's possible that it stood even before then, having towered over the then small settlement of Ormskirk. Heavily restored and in places expanded over the more than 800 years since, most of the church as we see it today dates from the Victorian era, but the layout of the building is especially interesting, including an entirely unique feature. You'll notice up above that the church features both a large tower and a spire, and it's one of only 3 churches in England with this feature, and this is the only one to have both a tower and a spire at the same end. Think about that for a second. There are as many as 16,000 churches in England, but only the church here in Ormskirk decided to have its cake and eat it, with both a spire and a tower at one end. As for why this ended up being the case, there's a local legend that the man who built the church had 2 daughters, one who wanted a tower and one who wanted a spire. To please them both, he built both a tower and a spire. But the reality is that the origin for this unique layout is rather more simple. In the medieval era, this church only had a spire, but upon the dissolution of the nearby monastery of Burscough Priory by Henry VIII, it was decided that the priory's bells should ring out from atop the parish church. Unfortunately, the spire wasn't built for this, and so in 1540, developers added a tower at the same end to house the new church bells. With all these different additions and restorations, the church is a bit of a Frankenstein mishmash of styles and designs from different eras, but that's what makes it so fascinating. But as well as the architectural quirks of Ormskirk's parish church, the building is also important as it's thought to have played a role in the development of this town's name. As we mentioned, it's possible that a church stood on the same site over 1,000 years ago, built as a small chapel in the Anglo-Saxon period. But by the 10th century, parts of Lancashire began to see an influx of Viking settlers arriving from the east alongside disused Roman roads, and one of their number is thought to have arrived and settled in this area. His name was Orm, and he either built the first church here or converted to the Christian faith and began worshipping in an Anglo-Saxon chapel that already existed here. As such, this place came to be known in the Old Norse language as Ormskirkja, meaning Orm's Church, and obviously this gradually developed into the town name that we know today, Ormskirk. Having explored the story of the town's unique parish church, we're now walking along Derby Street West, part of the road that encircles the 4 main streets around the clock tower in the centre of Ormskirk. This street was likely laid out in the late 1890s as a way to ease congestion in the town, with people historically having always made their way towards the clock tower when passing through Ormskirk. Now lined with some lovely houses, this street was also once busy with more than just residential life, serving as the home of Ormskirk's fire station and a row of shops, including the very first motor vehicle dealer in town, and in the late 20th century, a popular music store by the name of Sounds Good Records. In this car park though, we're passing by the site of another of the old courts of Ormskirk, where the town's poor lived cramped together in houses now long since demolished. But the large building that stands beside the site of the old court is from a different world altogether. It's an imposing Georgian-era townhouse that once upon a time served as the home of a wealthy member of the landed gentry. Once upon a time, there would have been a few more large Georgian houses like this around town, but the majority were demolished in redevelopment of the town centre in the 20th century, and as such this townhouse on the corner of Burscough Street, along with the Bucket Vine pub that we saw earlier, are a rare specimen in Ormskirk today. For the first few decades of its existence, this large house certainly did serve as a residence for a wealthy man and his family, but in the 19th century it went into use as a boarding school and then a bank, before being turned into offices and then back to being used for residential purposes as it is today. Nowadays, Ormskirk's Georgian townhouse occupies a prominent position at the end of Burscough Street, and it's a symbol of the historic wealth that the town has claimed in the past. But from here, we're now going to continue walking around the perimeter of the old town centre, along Derby Street, which takes its name from the Earl of Derby, who donated land in this area to be built on. Before it became a busy thoroughfare, however, Derby Street was little more than a small country lane bordered by fields known as Lydiate Lane, but it went on to become a brand new commercial centre for the town in the 19th century. The reason for this was that, before the opening of the railway station at the other end of Derby Street in 1849, there wasn't much passing trade here, and as such, there was no need for a major development in this quarter of the town. But across the road here, we're passing by one of the buildings that came to be constructed on the land donated by the Earl of Derby. Behind the scaffolding, this is the former Magistrates Court and Police Station of Ormskirk, built in the 1850s to serve the then fast-growing town. The courthouse and police station signalled Ormskirk's growing role as an important centre for the local, mostly rural region. The building operated as a courthouse for well over 160 years, ultimately closing in 2016, and after having been left empty since, work is now underway to convert it into flats. Facing the old Magistrates Court on the opposite side of the road, meanwhile, we can see a building that dates to 1866, the period when Derby Street here was booming as a brand new hub in Ormskirk. At one point, as you might be able to make out from the faded lettering on its facade, it was a branch of William's Deacon's Bank, though today the building stands unused. Now back across the road, there are two more Victorian-era buildings to speak about. Next door to the old Magistrates Court is another former bank, a branch of the local Ormskirk Savings Bank that was built in 1850. And next door to it is the former Infants and Girls' School of Ormskirk, built in 1837. That makes it one of the oldest buildings on Derby Street, and when it was first built, it served the children of this town, but Ormskirk's children also served it. When going to school, children were asked to provide money for coal for the fire to heat the school, but as many were from poor families living in the town's courts, they often went without sufficient heating, with the school at one point said to be so cold that the children were crying. At the end of Derby Street now, we're passing by the Railway Pub, which of course takes its name from the train line that runs through Ormskirk just a few steps away from us. As we mentioned, Ormskirk's railway station was opened in 1849 by the East Lancashire Railway Company, on the line linking Liverpool with Preston. Now Ormskirk's railway station, as it was when it was first built, is an important facility for people travelling to either Liverpool or Preston. But strangely, you can't make a trip through Ormskirk from either direction without getting off the train. While trains did originally run straight through here, in 1913 the line from Liverpool was electrified, but the line from Preston wasn't. This is the reason that Ormskirk's one-station platform today is actually separated in two by a large set of buffers, with electric Merseyrail trains like the one in yellow down below running from Liverpool, and non-electric mainline trains from Preston having to stop at the other end of the platform. So if you want to go between the two cities, you'll have to get off and walk a couple of yards along the platform here in Ormskirk to change trains. But as well as being notable for its perplexing layout, Ormskirk's railway station was also an important outlet for the people selling what came to be known as this town's most famous product, gingerbread. You'll remember at the start of our walk that we passed by a lovely little statue of a gingerbread man, and Ormskirk is thought to have been associated with the making of gingerbread for nearly 300 years. Now the origins of exactly how Ormskirk in particular came to be so closely associated with gingerbread are unclear, though some say that it was brought to the town by a traveller from France. However gingerbread ended up in town, in 1732 one of the earliest local gingerbread companies was established, that being the famous Files gingerbread. As well as Files, all of Ormskirk's gingerbread companies were run by women, typically revolving around mothers and grandmothers baking their own special gingerbread at home. And over the decades, these gingerbread ladies of Ormskirk came to be widely known around the country. Word of the women's gingerbread first began spreading in the late 18th century, as they started out by selling gingerbread to passing travellers on Aughton Street, part of the main route through town between Preston and Liverpool. When the railway station was opened, Ormskirk's gingerbread ladies found a new marketplace, and from 1855, 5 of them paid the East Lancashire Railway Company the sum of £20 per year for the privilege of selling their gingerbread to train passengers. Each of the women selling gingerbread in Ormskirk became famous in their own right in the town, and one of the most notable was one Sarah Files, who took control of the business originally established by her great-great-grandmother. In the late 19th century, Sarah Files took on a customer in Edward, Prince of Wales, who would later become King Edward VII, and who loved her gingerbread so much that he would send regular orders to Ormskirk for its gingerbread. Sometimes, when en route to Balmoral in Scotland, it's also said that Edward would often request that the royal train stop here in Ormskirk, so that he could pick up some of his favourite treats. Though gingerbread making isn't quite as commonplace in Ormskirk today, it's certainly baked into the history of this town, and you can still purchase it in shops and at market stalls in the town centre. Now, we've made our way around the perimeter of Ormskirk's town centre, and we now find ourselves on Moor Street, on which there stands this impressive statue of Benjamin Disraeli, formerly the British Prime Minister. Now weirdly, this statue exists despite Disraeli never having visited Ormskirk in his life. And the story goes that the statue was actually meant to be placed in Blackburn, but it was too big for its intended site. So, in 1884, the local Conservative Party clubbed together the funds to get it erected here in Ormskirk. From the Disraeli statue, we're now walking along Moor Street, which, as well as hosting many of Ormskirk's main high street chains, is also home to a number of pubs, including the Golden Lion back beside the Disraeli statue, and the Queen's Head here. Over a century ago, however, the Queen's Head used to have a neighbour where the street known as Moorgate now exists, and that was another pub by the name of the Anchor Inn, though it was demolished in the 1890s. Even so, there's a plentiful supply of pubs in this town of around 25,000 people, with at least 5 located on the 4 main streets around the clock tower. But as we find another lovely little gingerbread man statue, you'd better believe that there were once even more pubs. Moor Street was once also home to the Ship Inn, one of Ormskirk's most important coaching inns. Like the Bucketh Vine Inn on Burscough Street, it too had a theatre, which used to put on 2 plays each evening, charging punters just 5p to watch them both. The theatre was demolished in the 1920s, and the Ship Inn was later closed, but you can still see the building in which it was located, as above this shop there's a little sign with the image of a ship on it. There are many more fascinating little details about Ormskirk like that to be found around the town centre. But now we're approaching the end of our walk for today, which will finish up looking up at the clock tower where we started out. As I hope you've got an idea of as we've explored the town, the clock tower is very much the focal point of Ormskirk's town centre, both as a monument and also as the site where pretty much everybody travelling through town would once pass by. Of course, taking advantage of this central position, markets have long been situated around the clock tower, and the tower was historically adorned with a helpful table that listed the amount that each trader had to pay to set up their market stall here, with Ormskirk locals paying a lower fee than those from out of town. But the market was more than just a place for buying and selling goods. While everything from textiles to livestock and of course gingerbread was traded on these streets, this was also a place where people would come from all over southwest Lancashire to soak up a bit of atmosphere, as plays were put on by actors and the street thronged with visitors from the countryside, particularly during the annual town fairs that were held here in medieval times. Nowadays, markets are still held in Ormskirk every week on Thursdays and Saturdays, continuing an important piece of heritage that has endured in the town for 736 years. But as we've seen from our tour of the town streets today, that's just one part of Ormskirk's captivating history. Sadly, however, this is the point where we come to the end of our walk around this wonderful market town. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're looking forward to visiting Ormskirk and maybe even sampling some of its famous gingerbread for yourself sometime soon.